You may have heard of the movie Roman Holiday, which came out in 1953. It was a time when Americans in love with Italy after the war started to associate the country no longer with poverty and emigration, but with glamour and fashion. Two Hollywood giants star in this classic romantic comedy. Audrey Hepburn in the role of Anne, a princess visiting Rome on her own as a way to escape a regimented life, and Gregory Peck, starring as Joe, an expatriate reporter showing her around in order to win an interview from her. Well, if you don't recall the entire movie, I'm sure somewhere in your memory there is a spot for its most famous scene, where Anne tries to ride a Vespa with Joe through the streets of Rome before being arrested for reckless driving. Don't try to emulate her. She got away with it. You might not. Here is a brief clip of it.
Ehi, scusi. Attenta, fermate! Fatemi salire!
If you recognize the scene, you might agree now with the 1954 review of the movie by Forbes. While celebrating the Academy Award conferred on Audrey Hepburn, the magazine, in fact, also focused on the film's other female star. And here is my quote. That 1954 Oscar for the splendid Audrey Hepburn should have gone to the other female star. While Gregory Peck was courting Hepburn, the whole world fell in love with the metallic green Vespa 125. End quote. Couldn't have nailed it more. The movie was indeed a formidable commercial for the scooter, launching Vespa on the international market and turning it from a symbol of Italy's post-war reconstruction into an icon of Italian design, innovation, and style. From then on, Vespa would have a cultural life of its own in cinema and music. It would be a symbol of Italy's economic boom in Fellini's La Dolce Vita. It would be a key figure in Tornatore's Oscar and Golden Globe winning movie Nuovo Cinema Paradiso. It would be the star on the set of Penelope Cruz and Ben Stiller's Zoolander 2 in 2016. If you have been in an Italian language class, at some point, you might have heard one of the most popular songs in Italian musical memory, dedicated to Vespa, and launching the career of Luna Pop singer Cesare Cremonini. Be careful, the catchy tune of Cinquanta Special will really stick in your head for a while. Against this context, we can confidently affirm that the word Vespa is more commonly associated with scooters than wasps, which is the actual meaning of the Italian word. Vespa is now a product that needs no further explanations. However, how many of you can name its producer, Piaggio? Or even more, how many of you can name its designer, Corradino D'Ascanio? Today's episode is dedicated to him, and you might be astonished to discover that D'Ascanio was not only the mind behind a very popular scooter, but also the engineer who designed the first prototype of a helicopter. Born in 1891 in the region of Abruzzo, his lifelong passion was actually flight. During World War I, he joined the airplane factory Pomiglio, a company which would move to Indianapolis in 1918. D'Ascanio lived in the United States for about a year, but in 1919 he returned to Italy, where in the 1920s he worked on and patented several control mechanisms for helicopters. In 1930, after a commission from the Italian Ministry of Aviation, he produced the first helicopter prototype with two double-bladed and counter-rotating rotors. In its first flight in the same year, about 9 minutes at the Roman airport of Ciampino, the machine reached a height of 18 meters, about 54 feet. Despite this achievement, which led other nations like France and the Soviet Union to produce other similar prototypes in the early 1930s, the fascist government soon abandoned these first experiments, focusing instead on the production of standard aviation items. Thus, in 1932, D'Ascanio began working for a company, Piaggio, which at the time produced propellers and was run by the entrepreneur Enrico Piaggio. Why am I telling you these stories? Because D'Ascanio's passion for aviation, his experimental work on helicopters, and his collaboration with Piaggio are essential to understanding the later success of Vespa. Before moving to the motor scooter, however, allow me a couple of brief digressions here. First, as you may know, many argue that the first helicopter was actually designed by Leonardo da Vinci. His drawing of the so-called aerial screw is preserved in Paris at the Institut de France, manuscript B, Lift 83, for your curiosity. The sketch might surely represent an early intuition of the machine, but, well, on the one hand, there is no evidence suggesting that Leonardo actually built one, so this might be just a theoretical intuition. And on the other hand, the drawing suggests a mechanism with a very different functioning model. So, instead of a self-propelled machine, Leonardo's helicopter was a spring-activated device. The spring, anchored to the ground, charged the propeller, and the aerial screw was activated in a contrary motion at the unlocking of the spring. The second digression brings us back to the 20th century and relates instead to a significant rivalry in the field of airspace engineering between two Italian designers, Corradino D'Ascanio and Cesare Pallavicino, on the issue of how to create a sturdy and light body for aircrafts. D'Ascanio, who worked for Aereo Piaggio, theorized the use of a stamped spar frame. Pallavicino, who worked for Caproni, theorized the use of metallic tubes as a support frame. Footnote here. If you're not familiar with the Italian aviation pioneer Gianni Caproni, you can compensate for your lack of knowledge by watching the 1992 cartoon by Japanese director Hayao Miyazaki, Red Pig, or his 2013 historic drama The Wind Rises, the former featuring the epic adventures of Gianni Caproni during World War I, and the latter, the dreams of a Japanese World War II pilot to become like his Italian hero. Now, to go back to the D'Ascanio-Pallavicino rivalry, here is where the two greatest Italian scooters originate. Why? Because their clashing philosophies, the diatribe between stamped spar frame and tube frame, soon moved from aircrafts to scooters, replicating the need to create a solid yet light body for the motorcycle. Well, the main stimulus for designing two-wheeled vehicles came from the war itself. The US Army first used an olive green scooter, the so-called airborne Cushman scooter, which was produced in Nebraska, as a way to grant field transport for paratroops and Marines. It was actually used to get around Nazi defenses during the Battle of Monte Cassino and in the liberation of northern Italy. Around the end of the war, a few companies invested in this new means of transportation. By that time, the Italian manufacturer Innocenti, which produced steel tubes for scaffolding structures, commissioned D'Ascanio for the design of a simple, robust, and affordable two-wheeled vehicle modeled on the US Army scooter. There were three criteria for the project. It should be for men and women, it should carry a passenger, and he should not get the driver's clothes dirty. D'Ascanio followed the instructions and designed a revolutionary scooter with a shielding frame, an easy handlebar gear change, and the engine mounted on the rear wheel. Now, at this point, you might recall D'Ascanio's preference for a stamped spar frame over tube frames, right? Well, the Innocenti company, which wanted a tube frame scooter to revive its own business, quickly dismissed D'Ascanio's project. It is at this time that the Vespa and the Lambretta were born. D'Ascanio, in fact, would take his design to his company, Piaggio, which needed to recycle a surplus of engine starters intended for war aircrafts. And so, that is how the spar-frame Vespa was launched in 1946. A year later, his rival Pallavicino, the guy who terrorized two frames, designed for Innocenti the requested two-frame motorcycle, and that is how the Lambretta came to be. Over the subsequent decades, both Lambretta and Vespa gained enormous success. While the fame of Lambretta remained confined to Italy, Vespa became instead one of the most sold and recognized Italian-made items worldwide, with 16 million units produced in 130 different models. What made it so successful, you might ask? And you might even want to add, what did D'Ascanio do after 1946? Now, to respond to the first question, Vespa successfully synthesized light and solid materials, so aviation, the popularity of two-wheel transportation, so bicycles, and the elegance or comfort of cars. Part of its success then, of course, relates to its name, which was first suggested by D'Ascanio's boss, Enrico Piaggio. In seeing the scooter's prototype in 1945, it said that he commented, "Its waist is slim. It looks like a wasp." And that is how the Vespa got its name. To go back to the second question, what happened after Vespa? D'Ascanio went on working for Piaggio, but he also kept studying helicopters, which he always considered his field. In 1948, the International Helicopter Congress of Philadelphia saluted him as a true pioneer. In 1964, he finally left Piaggio to join Agusta, Italy's largest manufacturer of helicopters, whose American manufacturing facility is still in Philadelphia. At the same time, he also worked as a professor of design of machines and projects at the University of Pisa. Despite his scientific achievements and numerous patents in the world of aviation, D'Ascanio, however, would always be recognized, even after his death in 1981, as the designer of the Vespa. Okay, time to wrap up. Here's my Italian summary for today. D'Ascanio è un ingegnere italiano e un pioniere della aviazione globale. Lui ha elaborato il primo prototipo dell'elicottero e ha disegnato lo scooter Vespa, uno tra gli oggetti più iconici e riconoscibili dell'industria italiana. Ha lavorato per Piaggio e Agusta e è stato professore all'Università di Pisa. That's it for today. Don't forget to ride a Vespa at some point in your life. If you are in Italy, I highly recommend riding with someone local. Driving it on Italian roads is really an art. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ITA Innovators or at Luca Cottini for updates about the podcast and additional contents. Thanks for listening. Arrivederci e alla prossima.